In the vast expanse of the galaxy, countless species roamed across planets, both familiar and unknown. Wars were fought, alliances were made, and survival was the constant battle for many. On a distant planet named Seraphia, known for its lush forests and thick atmosphere, lived a species of tiny, insect-like aliens called the HFY. These creatures were no bigger than a child's hand, their bodies fragile and delicate, but their minds were sharp, and they had a natural agility that allowed them to survive in a world full of larger, more dangerous predators. A young HFY girl named Lyra had always been curious about the world beyond the boundaries of her forest home. Though she was small, barely able to lift her own weight in her environment, her heart yearned to explore. She had heard stories from the elders of her kind, tales passed down through generations, of other planets, creatures, and, most terrifying of all, humans. Humans were legends, told in hushed tones, often accompanied by warnings. Beware the humans. They are giants who eat everything, and you are small enough to fit in their mouths. These stories haunted Lyra's dreams, and she became fixated on the human legends that her people whispered about. She was afraid of them, but her curiosity also overwhelmed her. One day, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow over the alien jungle, Lyra's adventurous spirit took control. While the others of her kind were safe in their underground burrows, she ventured to the edge of the forest, near the shore where the strange vehicles of the humans sometimes appeared. She had never been this close to their technology, but the stories had intrigued her. Maybe, just maybe, the truth about these humans wasn't as terrifying as they said. What she didn't expect, however, was to find one of them so close to her. As Lyra neared the shoreline, she caught sight of a human figure in the distance. He was hunched down, seemingly searching for something in the sand. His back was to her, and his silhouette was enormous, bigger than any creature she had ever seen. She froze. Her tiny body trembled with fear. The human was real. She had heard the stories, but seeing one in person was a whole different experience. She darted behind a large stone, hiding as best as she could in the shadows. Her heart beat loudly in her chest, and her small antennae twitched nervously. From her vantage point, she watched the human. He was wearing rugged clothing, his face partially obscured by a helmet, but his movements were slow, methodical. He wasn't aware of her presence. She could see his large hands as he moved them around, touching the ground with a tenderness that seemed strange to her. He wasn't acting like a predator. Was this how humans hunted? Was this how they lured their prey before devouring it? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Suddenly, the human turned and walked in her direction. Lyra's instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to move. She was paralyzed by fear. He came closer, and she could see his face more clearly now. His expression focused, yet strangely calm. His eyes were scanning the area, looking for something, but he hadn't seen her yet. Then, without warning, the human knelt down in front of the stone where Lyra was hiding. He was so close that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. She gasped in fear and prepared to flee, but the human's voice, low and gentle, stopped her. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice calm, as if speaking to a frightened animal. "I won't hurt you." Lyra's antennae twitched at his words. He didn't sound like the monsters in the stories, but that didn't make sense. Her heart was racing. She had been taught that humans were vicious creatures, that they would rip apart anything smaller than them without a second thought. Why wasn't he attacking her? Why was he speaking in such a kind voice? She cautiously peeked around the stone and saw him looking at her, his eyes wide with curiosity, but there was no aggression in them, only wonder. You're XYLN, right?" he asked. His words were simple, but Lyra could understand them, though she had never spoken with a human before. Lyra didn't know what to do. Should she run? Should she stay hidden? But there was something about his voice, something in the way he looked at her that made her freeze in place. He wasn't reaching for her like she expected. He wasn't making any sudden moves. His face softened. "I'm not going to hurt you," he repeated, his hands slowly reaching towards her. His fingers were large, each digit seeming to stretch for miles in Lyra's perspective, but the movement was slow, careful, as if he were trying not to startle her. Lyra stayed perfectly still, watching his every movement. Her body tensed as he gently held out a small, glowing object alight. It was a strange device, but it was not threatening. The human seemed to be offering it to her. He wasn't holding it to her face. He wasn't trying to trap her. He was just waiting for her to approach it. "I know you're scared," the human continued, his voice soothing. "I don't want to harm you. I just want to understand." Lyra blinked in confusion. Understand? Humans didn't want to understand anything about her people. They wanted to capture them, control them. They wanted to eat them. But this human wasn't like that. He didn't act like the stories. The soft, glowing light seemed to call to her, and slowly, tentatively, she crept forward. Days passed, and Lyra found herself visiting the human more often. His name was Thomas, and he was a scientist studying the ecosystems on our planet. He had been part of an exploration mission sent to the planet's surface. But unlike other humans who came with weapons and conquest in mind, Thomas came to learn. His research focused on understanding the fragile balance of life on Seraphia. As Lyra watched Thomas, she saw a side of humans that she never knew existed, a side filled with compassion, curiosity, and genuine care. Over time, her fears of being eaten or harmed melted away. Thomas showed her his work, his equipment, and how he used the resources of the planet to study the world around them. She learned that humans could be gentle and kind, not the monsters she had been led to believe. One day, while working in his makeshift laboratory, Lyra noticed something strange. Her body felt different, slower, weaker. She had always been small, but today, her energy seemed to drain faster than usual. She had been hurt in an accident weeks ago, and despite her best efforts to heal, it seemed something deeper was wrong. Thomas noticed her sudden weariness. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern in his voice. "You don't look well." Lyra tried to shrug it off. She wasn't used to accepting help, especially from someone like Thomas. But her body wouldn't cooperate. She fell to her knees, weak, her circuits shorting out. Thomas rushed to her side. "Stay with me," he said urgently, his hands moving over her damaged systems. "I know a thing or two about repairs. I can help." He worked tirelessly, using his tools and knowledge to repair the tiny alien girl. Her fragile systems, built to last for short bursts of time, needed more than simple fixes. It was clear that she needed care and attention, far beyond what she could handle alone. As Thomas worked, Lyra couldn't help but feel a growing warmth in her heart. She had feared him at first, feared what he might do to her. But now, she realized that his kindness was the greatest repair of all. It wasn't the metal he worked on. It was her spirit, her trust, her understanding of the world that was being healed. When the work was done, and Lyra was restored, she looked up at him with grateful eyes. For the first time, she truly understood. "I'm not going to eat you, Lyra," Thomas said softly, looking into her eyes. "I'm here to help you. Always." And in that moment, as she looked up at the human who had shown her kindness and care, Lyra knew that the world she had feared wasn't as it seemed. Not all humans were monsters. Some were allies, friends, and protectors. And for the first time in her life, Lyra was no longer afraid.